This is the story of how the King of England crashed a private jet. You heard that right. This video is not clickbait. The current King of England, King Charles III, crashed the Queen's private jet, and this is how that happened. For those of you that don't know, the royal family has a private jet. Now that I think about it, the royal family probably has many private jets. From what I can find, the royal family has a VIP A330 and they charter planes as needed. Sometimes small private jets, sometimes the Concorde. The Royal Squadron had two BAE 146s for short-haul VIP transport, and those will be the focus for our video today. The BAE 146 was perfect for short-haul royal transport because it had some impressive short-field performance, meaning that it could squeeze into some tiny little airports that were scattered around London and around the UK. The four engines meant that the plane would be up and away in no time. On the 29th of June 1994, one of those BAE 146s was to fly from Aberdeen to Islay Airport. The plane had 11 people on board, one of whom was the then Prince of Wales, His Royal Highness Charles III. Oh, that's not me being pretentious, by the way. The final report actually refers to Charles as the Royal Highness. The flight left Aberdeen 23 minutes late, and since the distance between Aberdeen and Islay was less than 200 miles, they couldn't really just make up that time in transit. Thus, as they got closer to Islay, they were running just a little bit behind. The captain and the first officer were preparing for the landing, and 10 minutes before the landing, Charles took over from the first officer in the right-hand seat. The final report for this incident is only 3 pages long, and it took a few days of digging just to find that out. So, we don't have a lot of information on how the transfer took place. Did the first officer go, "Would you like to have a go, Your Highness?" Or did Charles ask to be in control? We don't know. There are no transcripts of cockpit conversations. Do let me know what you think happened in the comments below. With Prince Charles at the controls, the plane was now getting close to Islay. As they prepped for the landing, they got a weather report from Islay. The winds were at 250 degrees at 20 knots, and they had broken cloud cover at 500 feet and 1,000 feet. They could either land on runway 13 or runway 31, which would give them a stopping distance of 1,245 meters or 0.77 miles, which is more than enough for the plucky 146. But due to the cloud cover and the high terrain to the southeast, the captain decided to fly a procedural approach to runway 13. The captain was guiding Prince Charles through the approach. They were charting the best possible course through the runway, missing as much of the clouds as possible. The BAE 146 then lined up with runway 13, and Prince Charles took the plane down towards the runway, and within a few minutes the jet was almost at the runway. Then the jet touched down. But there was something wrong. There wasn't a whole lot of runway remaining. From the point of touchdown, they only had about 784 meters or about half a mile to stop. But here's the thing, it's not like the prince could just slam on the brakes from this point and then stop, because he landed nose first, meaning that the nose wheels were in contact with the runway first. At the point of touchdown, the main gear had not even made contact yet. The pilots in the cockpit were frantically trying to get the engines into ground idle and to deploy the spoilers, but the jet just simply did not want to slow down. With just 500 meters remaining on the runway, the jet finally landed, and then from that point on, they were trying to bleed off as much energy as possible to stop the jet in time. They were braking so hard that 2 of the main tires exploded. As the jet reached the end of the runway, the captain knew that the jet would not be able to stop, and so he tried to route the plane over to the taxiway on the left. But that did not work. The plane went off the runway and settled into the soft mud. The ferocious braking before had kind of worked as the plane overran the runway at a relatively low speed. But it wasn't slow enough. The soft mud broke the nose gear and the plane came to a stop, basically perpendicular to the runway. The accident had caused more than £1 million in damage to the taxpayer. The Prince of Wales had stuffed a landing. Now, I'm sure you must be quite curious. Was he a pilot? Was he qualified to fly a BAE 146? Let's answer the first part of that question first. King Charles certainly can fly. He was taught to fly in the Royal Air Force. Here's what Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Johns had to say about the King's flying. Quote, "The real reward of being a military flying instructor is not just teaching a student who achieves a pass above average standard, but teaching a student that proves that they have the ability to be a first-class operational pilot." End quote. He started out his training in a Chipmunk aircraft before transitioning over to the Bassett CC-1 before transitioning over to jet aircraft. He then went on to fly helicopters and the like. The short of it is that King Charles sure knew how to fly. There are many articles online about how he was a fast and determined learner that took to flying very easily. But that being said, you know what I didn't find any credible evidence of? The king ever flying a BAE 146 or being trained in one. I did find this obscure website that said that he knew how to fly a BAE 146, but nothing from official. Now, here's the thing, you can't just plop into an airplane and know how to fly it because you know how to fly another plane. I mean, pilots have to undergo extensive training to fly a different airplane from the same manufacturer. I mean, look at the case of South African Airlines Flight 228. In that case, the pilots were flying a new model of the same plane that they had been flying for years, and that was enough to trip them up. So expecting to be able to fly a complicated four-engine jet with very little prior experience is kind of nothing short of hubris, if you ask me. Physics just does not care for your titles. Looking into this incident, we see that all of this started when they were getting ready to land. By this point, the king was already in the left-hand seat, and the captain decided to land on runway 13 due to the winds aloft at the runway. Now here's the thing, runway 13 had a 13-knot tailwind. This meant that the plane would have a little bit of extra speed as it came in to land, nothing that experienced pilots could not handle. But he never shared this information with the king. Maybe he didn't want to saturate the king with this information, maybe he thought that the king could figure it out on his own, but this critical piece of information was not shared. After that, the captain guided the king close to the runway, avoiding as much of the clouds as possible. But this led to a little bit of a problem. By the time the plane was lined up with the runway, the plane was too high and too fast. Now the king would have to put the plane into a steeper descent than usual to get to the runway. This meant that they'd be carrying a lot more speed when they got to the runway, and that's exactly what happened. The plane was carrying about 32 knots of additional speed as they hit the runway. Add to the fact that the runway at Islay was very short, and that basically sealed the fate of the jet. The orientation in which the plane landed also played a part in the incident. You see, since the nose gear touched down first, the computers did not realize that the jet was on the ground. The main gear needed to be on the ground for that to happen. So since the computer thought that the plane wasn't on the ground, it did not allow the pilots to deploy the spoilers or the reversers to slow the plane. This meant that the plane was being penalized in two ways. One, it was on a very short runway, and two, it wasn't allowed to slow down, meaning that the only way that this flight would end was in an overrun. In the end, the investigation found the captain at fault. We need to have a conversation about this. But first, let me read you verbatim what's in the report. The inquiry determined the cause of the accident was the captain permitted a mishandled approach and landing to continue beyond a point from which a safe stop was possible. The inquiry considered that because of his failure to intervene when the aircraft performance and aircraft limitations were exceeded in the final stages of the flight, the captain was negligent. For failure to advise the captain of the tailwind component and to draw his attention to the inaccurate approach parameters, the inquiry also deemed the navigator to be negligent. They found the pilots to have caused this accident. The report clearly stated that administrative action was taken against the pilots, and an Associated Press article from 1995 said that no blame was placed on the king. Now, don't get me wrong, the captain absolutely did make mistakes, not providing the tailwind component for the approach to runway 13, but let's be honest here, there's a pretty huge power dynamic at play here as well. Pilots might find it hard to go against someone who is so much more superior to them. Take, for example, the crash of the Polish presidential plane. The pilots in both cases might have been hesitant to say no to someone who is so superior to them. In the end, this comes back to that lesson that we learned with Aeroflot Flight 593. Having someone in the cockpit who is not supposed to be there can lead to disaster. In this particular case, they were quite lucky to have walked away from all of this. After all of this, the king decided to hang up his wings and retire from flying. Maybe that's for the best. What do you make of all of this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Did you know that the king flew or that he crashed a plane? I certainly didn't. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. I will catch you guys next time. Stay safe.